Starting recording. Is it okay? We're live. Welcome to In Search of True North. This week we are talking about. We're kind of deep diving in something that we scratched the surface on in previous weeks, which is Biden's cabinet picks. If you kind of surf the wave of sewage that is the mainstream media. We're told that we should feel pretty good about all this. There's a lot of diversity. There's a lot of inclusion, a lot of first-time Black person in this position or first-time woman's been in this position, which sounds really great. But the truth is, if you scratch beneath the surface, that if you're anything other than an establishment apologist, if you're a libertarian, if you're a progressive, if you're even a constitutional conservative, and especially if you don't believe in forever wars that lead to tens or hundreds of thousands of civilian casualties in countries that really didn't deserve it, there's not a lot to feel good about in any of this. So Zach and I kind of took a deep dive and tried to learn as much as we can about not even all of his cabinet, but some of the handful of ones that stood out to us from the beginning. So with that, Zach, you want to start with Antony Blinken?
Sure. Yeah, the diversity is kind of where the good things end, I suppose. But yeah, so lots of former CIA, lots of former NSA, war-mongering folks who he picked for his cabinet. So you dug up a lot of stuff on Antony. Let's see.
Yeah. So one thing, reading into this, a lot of the terms I was familiar with, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, some of these I had no, Secretary of the Treasury, but while I was researching, I realized I didn't have a very firm understanding of what the people in these positions actually do. So for anyone else who was in a similar position as me, Secretary of State is basically kind of the top diplomat in the White House. Well, with all these positions, Secretary of whatever department, that person is basically second only to the president. And given that the president can't be an expert in all of these different departments, you can kind of de facto see the secretary of any department as basically being the person in charge of it. The president has the authority to overrule the secretary, but the secretary is going to be the subject matter expert who's really in charge of that department. So Antony Blinken will be Secretary of State and will be in charge of foreign affairs, will be Biden's principal advisor, will be the lead negotiator with foreign governments, which includes negotiating with governments about all sorts of different treaties, whether that's like something like the Iran nuclear deal or something like the Paris Climate Accords. That would all fall under the Secretary of State. So it's a very important role that's really going to set the tone for America's foreign policy. And I think Antony Blinken is, well, it's interesting because I think if you're idealistic, he's a pretty terrifying choice. But if you understand that, of course, nothing was going to change by voting for Biden, we were just going to get more of the same. It's not exactly terrifying. It's just yeah, he sucks. He's a corporate bot, neocon pretending to be a Democrat, kind of going through the greatest hits of his history. He supported the war in Libya, and he also pushed hard for the war in Syria. And what's really interesting about Blinken is he's very, very, very stereotypical of this pretentious neoliberal type of Democrat that you see, very, very reminiscent of Obama and perhaps even more so Hillary Clinton, where they talk about war in all these sanitized ways where they're not they don't try to it's distinct from the neoconservative approach to propagandizing war, because what the neoliberal approach is basically to say that we have to do it for human reasons, or for sometimes they'll talk about national security, but a lot of times they talk about how we need to go in and overthrow this dictator or something like that because he's oppressing his people. And they talk about it in this way where the neocon perspective was, we're going to go in and crush them with our military might. The neoliberal perspective wasn't anti-war the way that you would think a liberal should be. It was, well, it's like work smarter, not harder, but applied to war. So the terminology that Blinken used for Syria was stuff like, it's going to be a smart and sustainable war with limited but effective action. And obviously, that was not what we got. But that's the way he talked about it. That's how he sold it. And to show just how psychopathic these people are, what a flagrant disregard for the value of human life they have. Michele Flournoy, who's going to be Biden's Secretary of Defense pending her approval by Congress. They started a think tank called the Center for a New American Security, abbreviated CNAS. They're a pro-war think tank that gets millions of dollars from the military-industrial complex, and that their think tank literally has advocated for causing famine in Syria. That the phrase that was used in their PR was, "Wheat is a weapon." So they're literally saying, hey, starve anyone who's against us in Syria. And I don't think you have to be very smart to figure out that that's not a targeted method of war. That's going to affect thousands, tens of thousands, maybe millions of civilians. You can't have targeted famine. But that's the sort of policy that Blinken and also Flournoy advocate for.
Yeah, I think it's something like, even if you take the famine part out of it, it's something like 90% of casualties from our bombing of Syria is innocent civilians. So, and add the famine in there, and you're killing even more civilians. That's just insane. Yeah.
For our listeners too, that's not Zach's conjecture. That was actually an internal government review. I'm not sure if it was done by the CIA or the Pentagon, but the government's own review found that 90% of the people killed in drone attacks which we were told, the way that the Obama administration sold drone attacks to us, we were told that drone attacks were the smart, ethical, targeted form of warfare. It's very much like that neoliberal terminology. It was, we're going to be smart, we're going to be stealthy, we're going to go in and just kill the guys, the bad guys, and get out of there, and none of our troops need to be deployed. And the government's own internal findings were that 90% of the people who were killed were not the intended targets. The government basically decided that, well, anyone who was killed was probably an enemy combatant anyway. But I think, again, I don't think you have to be very shrewd to assume that most of those people are actually just civilians.
Yeah. So I see you have on here, Cody, it says the U.S. should never publicly criticize Israel. What's the significance of that? Like, why? Because we're allies? Because, kind of taking me through why we shouldn't criticize Israel from his perspective, I guess.
Honestly, I didn't look much further into that. I saw that he had said that, and I just thought that was ridiculous enough, so I just put that up there.
That's fair. It is ridiculous. I guess he means from a governmental standpoint, like our government should never publicly say anything against Israel.
Yeah, definitely.
But I guess because we're allies, that we should. I probably sound kind of stupid here, so if you guys know, please let me know. I don't know why that would be significant. He also calls for the containment of Russia, which is a very old-fashioned way of thinking, in my opinion. I don't think Russia has done anything significant against the United States for a lot of years, other than being used as a scapegoat for election fraud and stuff like that. But
I was just about to tease you and say, but they stole the 2016 election and elected a president who actually was tougher on them than his predecessor.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. If anything, they interfered on behalf of Hillary, but neither side has proven anything. So, Antony Blinken, that's basically a war hawk. I'd be curious to know what ties he has to the MIC, to the military-industrial complex. Like, does he have? Has he been a lobbyist for them? I assume. Like, I'm just curious at this point which particular companies like Raytheon, Lockheed, stuff like that he has investments in, because otherwise, why would you be advocating for this stuff? It's just insane to me. But
yeah, I mean, after Obama's second term ended, he formed West Executive Advisors to help companies achieve government contracts. I don't remember the exact quote, but he had said something about how that had always been one of his passions, to help companies that want to become federal contractors get a piece of the taxpayers' the taxpayer pie. Like, what a ridiculous thing to call your passion. But yeah, so he made a lot of money at West Exec Advisors, just helping companies become federal contractors. And I thought it was interesting that despite the obvious public interest in the firm's activities, West Exec cites non-disclosure agreements as prohibiting it from divulging who its clients are. Despite that, we do know that some of its include a major U.S. defense contractor. I would assume several, but we know there's at least one. And we also know that one of his clients was Google billionaire Eric Schmidt, and that's via prospect.org.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because thinking about that, the idea of being having a government contract isn't entirely like bad, right? I mean, you think of things that the government does need. I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head, but like you can have a, what's that?
Asphalt
for, construction, roads, stuff like that. It's not a wholly a bad thing, but the government contracts that they're talking about here are not good. I mean, they're U.S. defense contracts. They're, I
would assume Google was like something to do with the NSA or something like that. I mean, that's pure speculation, but
sure. Yeah. But, and you think, if I could go on a slight tangent here, you think about all the things that could become a government contract. I mean, you think of nuclear weapons. Like, obviously we have them. The companies that make them are going to be contracted with the government. That's where all our money goes. But then you think of all the components of a nuclear weapon, or of an F-22 Raptor, or you think of all the components of that. I saw today that there's a company that makes like rivets, that is, they have a lot invested in the military industrial complex, in these government contracts that they have. And it's crazy to me how deep it runs, and you think of just getting rid of the $1 trillion you spend on our defense budget. You have to really think about all these companies that are employing people. And I'm not defending them in any sort of way. I'm just saying that it runs deep. It would, that's how difficult it would be to try to get rid of some of the war machine that we've created.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that started to frustrate me when I used to be a libertarian, is I don't think most libertarians understand that the government is not just Congress and the president and the governors and the state legislatures and the police departments. At this point, our government is this mushy blob of public sector and private sector cronies. And some of that is the sort of stereotypical corruption that people talk about with lobbying and stuff like that. But then a lot of it is just contractors who get a huge amount of their annual revenue from the government. So it's in their best interest for the government budget to always go up because they know that that money is going to get spent, and some of that extra money will probably be spent with them. And it's all sorts of shit that you just never would have thought about, like what you said, rivets. I read Smedley Butler's book War is a Racket, and I might have brought this up in a previous episode, but he said there were something like 20,000 new millionaires who made their fortunes off of government contracts in World War One. I mean, just in America. And some of the shit is like companies that sold millions of dollars worth of mosquito netting to the federal government. Yeah. The soldiers didn't need mosquito netting in France, but the federal government bought, tons of mosquito netting for those soldiers. And like, I remember, I forget what it was called. It was like biotech or something like that. There was a company that I interviewed with in Michigan, and they were studying anthrax and stuff like that. And their only customer, I don't remember if it was their only customer or if it was something like 70 to 90%, but it was the overwhelming majority of their revenue just came from the government. This contractor that's just playing with anthrax all day. Mm-hmm. A multi-million-dollar company.
Right.
Maybe multi-billion, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, you think about these companies, and we'll move on to Michele here in a second. We'll wrap up Blinken. But these companies have a lot of, like, they have the Congress people, congressmen and women, they bribe them. I mean, you know what I mean? Like they have, trying to wrap my head around what I'm trying to say. Basically, they're going to get paid. Like once they're in it, they bribe enough Congress people that you can't just be like, oh, we'll just drop them from their government contract. It's like, well, they've bribed enough people that now that the Congress people that they've bribed, who they're like, hey, we'll give you jobs afterwards if you lobby for us, or if you keep our contract in place, we got a job for you coming out of this, or something like that, or we have X amount of money for you coming out of it. And that's just how it goes. So that's why they end up keeping their contracts for years and years and years. So
you see that pattern too with most of Biden's cabinet picks, where they spent anywhere from 4 to 10 years or so in the government, and then in between roles in the government, they go work in the private sector and become millionaires if they weren't already. Mm-hmm. Before we move on from Blinken, one of the quotes that I found to be the most revealing, not just of Blinken's worldview, but because he was speaking on behalf of Biden, it's also very revealing of Biden's worldview. And it's pretty concerning. He said that Biden knows, he says Biden knows the U.S., quote, shouldn't be the world's policeman, end quote, but then tellingly qualified, begin new quote, but the thing he believes equally is that the world doesn't organize itself. And if we're not doing it, either someone else will, and not in a way that advances our interests and values, or no one will. And then you get chaos. We can't abdicate our responsibility to lead because ultimately it's in our self-interest. And that, to me, was the most perfect example of neoliberal gaslighting over mass murder and genocide. Mm-hmm. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of innocent people that our military has murdered in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Libya, in Yemen, and the list goes on. And the way that neoliberals like Blinken and apparently Biden, for whom he was speaking, they won't tell you, hey, we think it's okay to commit genocide, because that would be awful. What they say is, and they actually pretend to be on your side. It's such brilliant gaslighting. It's like
Yeah.
it's like abusive parent type shit. Yeah, no, we know we don't want to be the world's policeman, but the world's a chaotic place, and we need to bring it into the 21st century. And if we don't do it, someone else is going to do it, or no one will, and then the world will just be chaotic. So really, these people are all poor anyway, and we want their oil, and we want their uh, lithium. Let's just, if we have to kill a few 100,000 people, that's the cost of progress.
Yeah, it's
we can't abdicate our responsibility to lead.
It's if we don't kill them, they'll come kill us, is what they're telling you. And
that's not even what he said. That would be
no, but that is what he's saying. Is exactly what he's saying.
I think
we don't go out.
That would be the neoconservative perspective. His perspective is that if we don't do, that would be not their perspective, more their talking points.
The way they say it.
He's not at all saying that they're going to be a threat to us. He's saying the world will be a less orderly, more chaotic, less perfect place if we don't intervene, which is more than the neoliberal talking points. And then he talks about if we don't do it, someone else is going to, and they're gonna get all the resources, and they're gonna put people into power that we don't agree with. They're going to organize the world in a way that doesn't advance our interests and values, which he says values as though, like, oh, democracy and free trade.
So
it's all about our interests, and by interest he means money. He means ExxonMobil. He means BP. He means the all the companies that need the precious minerals that are in Afghanistan and that are in Bolivia.
Yeah, I think it's
that I couldn't believe that that's out there, that quote is out there, and that this man is going to be one of the most powerful diplomats in the country, really in the world, and he fucking said that. I'm really
curious to see. You're good. I'm curious to see if we did pull out of everywhere. If we had no troops deployed anywhere in the world, I mean, barring a few at embassies here and there, whatever's necessary, right? But nothing like Syria or Afghanistan or anything. If we brought them all home, to what extent are his statements? To what extent would they come true? And that's saying that forget about government corruption, forget about the CIA forcing something to happen. Like, just bring them all home and see what happens. And I'd be really curious to see to what extent the world becomes a better place, or as he would say, he insists that it would go to chaos. I guess the only way to do it is to find out, and they're never going to do it. So I guess we could just conjecture for now, but
I think we can make a pretty respectable, educated guess that he's absolutely wrong. Mm-hmm. The U.S., because just knowing the history of most of these conflicts, and just the surface level history of it, the U.S. has not been a force for order. The U.S. has not been a force for democracy or even basic human rights. The U.S. has consistently been a force for chaos, has been a force for fascism, and often a force for mass murder and genocide. It has consistently armed radical psychopaths, whether we're talking about Central or South America or the Middle East or Africa. We've armed these crazy radical groups to overthrow governments. And I'm sure a lot of those governments had their problems. I'm sure a lot of them weren't enlightened democratic leaders, but they weren't as bad as the people that the U.S. armed to overthrow them, and they oftentimes weren't as bad as the people that the U.S. installed as leaders afterwards. So this whole smokescreen, I mean, it's just gaslighting bullshit. It's the type, it's like what an alcoholic abuser says to his partner. It's that kind of like, I don't know how to tie the bow around
Yeah,
that thought.
no, it's psychological games they play with people. Like
Absolutely, yeah.
the way, and I'm pretty sure I'm sure that people like um, Blinken have a psychologist that works with them to be able to write their speeches and to be able to express in a way like
That's an interesting idea I'd never considered.
I mean, I'm almost certain they do because this is expertly written. I mean, if you're just reading it as like you know, I'm having trouble not believing it myself. Like I just asked the question, like, to what extent would we be put into chaos? Like, as in, you know, is he right? I don't know. Um, so it's very, I mean, it's very well written, and I'm sure he delivered it just as well. I mean, you know, they're experts in that for sure.
It's interesting too because I got it. Yeah, I got it from the Atlantic, which is it's not truly like it postures as though it's a leftist magazine, but it's actually part of the big mushy cesspool of sycophants who basically publish propaganda for the CIA and the Pentagon. And I wonder when you see perfectly crafted talking points like that are so elegantly, beautifully manipulative, I wonder how much of that is massaged after the interview. If they send the first draft to Blinken or his associates and say, "Well, here's how it turned out. Like, what do you guys think?" Because yeah, you're right. It is perfectly crafted propaganda.
Yeah, it's incredible, and surely some sort of they have a team of psychologists and sociologists and experts in those fields that help them to promote this kind of propaganda. I mean, it's too well written, you know.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and I had never thought of that. It's funny too because when you see stuff like that juxtaposed to how how offensively sloppy and transparent the propaganda that you hear from someone like Neera Tanden, you almost sort of wonder like what sort of training did Blinken get that Tanden didn't, or
Maybe he's just that much better at speaking. I don't know. I mean,
maybe.
who knows? But
But yeah, so that's there's other stuff. Jimmy Dore did a great segment about Antony Blinken. The Gray Zone has at least one article that we used as a source. I'm sure it has others as well. So there's all sorts of other stuff too that's really concerning about Blinken. But those are sort of some of the things that jumped out at me. Moving on to Michele Flournoy or Flournoy. I meant to look up how to pronounce her name before this, but forgot. She will be the Secretary of Defense, which basically means just like the Secretary of State, she will be second only to the president in her authority over the Department of Defense. So she will be tremendously powerful in dictating all military policy, and that's for all branches of the military: the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, the Marines, or are they part of the Army? I forget. But
Marines are
yeah.
part of the Navy technically, but
Right. Yeah. So Space Force as well. That's the one I knew I was.
Don't forget about the Space Force.
So she actually, of all the people that I learned about researching for this podcast, she's actually the most terrifying to me. Blinken's pretty scary, but Michele Flournoy edges them out. So and I just I cannot fucking believe that this is all out there if you know where to look for it. And it's just the mainstream media's job in all of this. which to all of our listeners, remember, there's only like 6 companies that own all of those publishing companies.
Yeah.
But their job in all of this is it's not even, oftentimes it's not even to lie and try to tell you that any of this isn't true. It's just to redirect your attention to something else instead of talking about what an awful warmongering psychopath Michele Flournoy is. They talk about how great it is that we have a female Secretary of Defense. Go girl power. So starting off with her, what was concerning to me about her, the first thing, I had never heard of this, but she was the principal author of the Clinton administration's 1996 quadrennial defense review, which called for, quote, full spectrum dominance. And she called for, quote, unilateral use of military power to ensure, quote, uninhabited access to key markets, energy supplies, and strategic resources, which sounds a hell of a lot like American foreign policy from the last 20 years.
Oil is what she means. I mean,
Yeah,
energy supplies, key markets, oil, and strategic resources, oil. So,
well, and also precious minerals. Like if I recall correctly, I don't think Afghanistan has that much oil, if any. It's mostly just it's very rich in natural resources. Also has a lot of really lucrative poppy fields, but I'm sure that has nothing to do with it.
oh no, of course
not. And
yeah.
I think that little factoid too. When you talk to people who are kind of MSNBC zombies, who think that all of the problems of the Bush administration were solved when we voted for Barack Obama, and then all of our new problems began when he left office and Trump took office. You really, like, when you don't have to dig that deep to find out that no, this is a bipartisan strategy that continues from one administration to the next, pretty much without any interruption. This idea of using the military, again, like, you can't make this shit up. They literally called for, quote, full spectrum dominance, using unilateral use of the military power to ensure uninhibited access to key markets, energy supplies, strategic resources. If that is not some mafia-esque thuggery masquerading as foreign policy, then like, and she's going to be the Secretary of Defense, the second most influential and powerful person in our whole military chain of command.
I think it's important here. I see you mentioned she served under Obama here, as I think they all did, actually.
Yeah, almost all of them, if not all of them.
Yeah, that should tell you something. But so I see it's worth noting that the CIA leaks that came out did mention that you mentioned Bush and all our problems going away when we voted for Obama.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, they wanted Obama to be president because he would be able to basically he would be able to keep the same regime that Bush had done with the wars, but he would look good doing it. I mean, is I guess in a nutshell, that's what it was.
Yeah, can you imagine if Bush had tried to do all the awful fascist, thuggish bullshit that Obama tried to pull, or that he successfully pulled? If Bush had done that shit, there would have been massive public outcries.
Yeah. Or any other president ever, really. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I started wondering. I started wondering if Clinton and whether Reagan, if either of them could have gotten away with it, because they were both pretty damn good politicians.
Reagan got away with more domestic stuff, just because.
Oh, he did his administration did some fucky foreign policy shit too. Like the Iran Contra shit. Like Congress literally made it illegal for us to send any funds to the Contras in Nicaragua. The Contras were basically a radical terrorist group that we were funding to try to overthrow the government of Nicaragua. And because Congress refused to give any money to fund the Contras, the CIA was allowing tremendous amounts of cocaine into the U.S. to be sold in the inner cities, and they were using that money to fund the Contras. And then when they got in trouble for that and couldn't do it anymore, they started selling arms to Iran, who we're told is this major threat to the whole world, and using that money to fund the Contras.
Yeah. Under
Um,
Reagan. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, under Reagan. And then when Reagan was questioned about it, he claimed that he knew nothing about it. I think
I
actually, I
would
think that's when he started to claim he was going senile.
I would believe him in in the sense that from what I've read about, I didn't live back then, but from what I've read about him and how he ran his administration, he kind of just handed a lot of things over to his cabinet, like for uh, the Secretary of Defense, for example. He would just be like, "Here you go. Yep, I'll approve whatever you want to do. I trust that you know best," and just kind of let it happen from there. So I would believe that he had no clue what happened.
I mean,
That
he literally was an actor. Like that
Yeah,
was his
he was,
pre-political
and
career.
he was huge into the like "fuck yeah, America, we're the best country ever" kind of deal. I mean, everyone in the '80s was having a banging time being an American. I mean, it was a good time to be alive, but that was a kind of a smokescreen for all the stuff they were doing behind closed doors, obviously. So um, I want to get into this quote you have highlighted here because this is a good one.
Oh, I just absent-mindedly highlighted it. Yeah,
Uh,
okay. Yeah, do it.
yeah. So you have written here that she also supported the Bush administration's lies about Iraq, saying, this is in quotes, in some cases, preemptive strikes against an adversary's weapons of mass destruction capabilities may be the best or only option we have to avert a catastrophic attack against the United States. So exactly what we did, exactly what we did with post 9/11 is we went into Iraq and uh, found nothing, but we thought they had something. So we went ahead and did preemptive strikes on Iraq uh, to what did she say? To avert a catastrophic attack against the United States.
I just Googled it to see what she said in place of weapons of mass destruction, and for our listeners, that the weapons of mass destruction quote, that part of the quote is in brackets. It's like trying to contextually explain to people what she was getting at when you see the quote out of context. And when I Google it, all of the examples of the quote um, are formatted that way. So I wonder if what she originally said was preemptive strikes against an adversary's capabilities, and then the way people have used it is to kind of contextually explain it. They put in weapons of mass destruction. I'm not sure. But this comes from the gray zone. They do that's where I got the quote, and they do really great journalism. So I trust them that it's the way that they used the quote was not contextually misrepresented.
Yeah, I don't think it would be a reach to add weapons of mass destruction in brackets here. I mean, if she's talking about some other sort of capabilities, I'm not sure what that would entail. Um, so I think it's pretty safe to say that weapons of mass destruction is a
Yeah, I'm sure.
good filler in here. So
I wanted to be as transparent as possible that that's not the exact quote, that part is inserted for kind of clarity.
yeah. So basically, what she's saying is post 9/11, we need to attack these people before they attack us again. I mean, in a nutshell, that's what she's saying. She's being an apologist for going into Iraq and bombing the shit out of them and not finding anything for the past like 12 years. So, or I mean,
And it's a
long
fucking
past.
joke too, because at that point, Iraq had suffered pretty much a decade straight of crippling U.S. sanctions. There was one estimate. It's contested whether it's now contested whether this is accurate, but there was a study done in the mid 90s that the U.S. sanctions against Iraq caused 500,000 children below the age of 5 to die either of starvation or from lack of access to basic medical supplies. And regardless of whether that's entirely true, the Clinton administration thought it was a legitimate enough estimate that they didn't argue against it. Madeleine Albright, who was, I think she was a high-ranking member of the Clinton administration. I want to say she was Secretary of State. Hang on. I'll be pissed at myself if I don't get this right. So bear with me for a sec. Yeah. Okay. So she was Secretary of State from 1997 to 2001 under Bill Clinton, and she was asked on 60 Minutes about that estimate that 500,000 children died in Iraq, just during the first 5 or 6 years of the sanctions. And she didn't say that's a flawed estimate. She didn't say that's wildly exaggerated. She said, it's a tough decision, but we think it's worth it. That's almost verbatim, if not verbatim. So my point is, these sanctions were obviously fucking crippling. If the administration that levied the sanctions, when that administration hears an estimate that, 500,000 children under the age of 5 have died because of these sanctions, yeah, that seems like a reasonable guess, but it's worth it. So the idea that after 10 years of those sanctions, that Iraq was any sort of legitimate threat to the U.S. that needed to be taken out before they had the capability to launch a, quote, catastrophic attack against the United States. It's fucking ludicrous. It's fucking ludicrous. 10 years of us just crippling their economy, and and somehow they're a threat to us. It's nonsense.
They have weapons of mass destruction, Cody. That's all you need to know. And but think about the extent to which people bought that. I mean, this was kind of in the budding age of the internet, is 2001, and correct me if I'm wrong, but were we in Iraq in the 90s as well? Where was Desert Storm?
Yeah, that was Iraq.
That was Iraq as well.
It's actually, so this is a minor tangent from Flournoy, but the Saddam was our buddy, because we armed Saddam. We gave him chemical fucking weapons to use against Iran, whom even as far back as the 80s we hated, because they basically pushed out our guy, the Shah, and basically said fuck you to the United States. So we loved Saddam because we were able to use him as a sort of proxy military force in a proxy war against Iran. And so we were on great terms with him. And then he actually, he had a meeting with, I don't remember the name of the woman, but she was a high-ranking diplomat from the U.S. government, and he told her, "Hey, I kind of want to invade Kuwait. What do you think of that?" And she literally said something to the effect of, that's your business. We officially have no stance on what you do in your own backyard. That's she basically said the U.S. isn't going to intervene. And then he did it. And I don't know, maybe I'd have to Google it. Maybe he used chemical weapons. I don't know. But even if he did, we supplied him. Well, I say we, it might have been Europe, but the West supplied him with chemical weapons to use against Iran. And so we propped him up as this like awful, oppressive military dictator. And then when he did what awful, oppressive military dictators do, invaded Kuwait, and after he had basically been given the green light to do that, then President George H.W. Bush says, "Oh my God!" What was it? They used the clip of it in The Big Lebowski. He says, "This act of aggression will not stand. This act of aggression against Kuwait." I'm pretty proud of that impression, having done it off the cuff and never impersonated him before. But yeah, so that we went in. We basically, I mean, they stood no chance against the American military. We kicked their ass pretty quickly. I don't know why, but we left Saddam in power, and but we were still mad at him for some reason, so we just levied really harsh sanctions against him for like 10 years. And then when George W. Bush took office, he decided to finish his daddy's job. And that's when we went to Iraq again. It's kind of a bizarre fucking story.
Yeah, but I think that's pretty much it in a nutshell. And yeah, so let's keep going with Michele. So, like your quotes here.
Yeah.
So I can read this one too if you want. But,
yeah, go for it.
After the Iraq War began, she chastised anti-war left-wingers, saying, quote, "Democrats will maintain the world's most capable and technologically advanced military, and we will not flinch from using it to defend our interests anywhere in the world."
How the fuck is that different at all different from Trump? That's what I don't get. Like all these people who are like, "Oh, America's back. We beat Trump." Like how is it's more intelligently phrased, I guess, or it's more pretentiously phrased, but the sentiment is exactly the same sort of shit you would hear from Trump.
And I mean, way more insidious too, as
I agree.
As our Jimmy would say. I mean, it's always more insidious. It's the people who pretend to be your buddy who say these things that are more insidious. It's the people who, pretend to be on your side who then go and do this shit. And those are the people who are more insidious than Donald Trump. Donald Trump wears it on his sleeve. I mean, the guy is an asshole. Like, there's no question that, he tweets out. He would tweet this stuff. Like, he would literally tweet this quote
Yeah,
here.
he would.
Like, you have no doubt in your mind, like, what this man is thinking. And, but this, I mean, I don't know in what context she said this, but it was most likely some sort of statement she was giving, some sort of speech, and she just hides this in there. It's just like a little veil, It's just like, or someone asked. It was probably maybe a question and answer board, and
I assume that this was probably going into the midterm elections before Obama's election in 2008, or it was something she said probably right after Obama was elected.
Mm-hmm. Basically, they probably accused Democrats of being soft on military.
Oh,
so
I'm
she
sure.
had to defend them. I mean, that's what. But what does Biden do? I mean, Biden and all Democrats really just defend the war machine, constantly defending the war machine. And this is a classic quote: is that someone claims that the U.S. is soft on war, and so we go start another one. They claim that the Democrats were soft on drugs, so what did Joe Biden do? Or soft on crime, so what did Joe Biden do? He did the crime bill 94. I mean, it's kind of what Democrats have been doing. They've been moving right for decades now. And
there's this attitude that they try to outright the Republicans, all while pretending to be the left party. That's why you see in that one clip that Jimmy shows of Biden saying, what programs do we need to cut? Social Security and Medicare, because he finds it empowering as a Democrat to say, yeah, I'm going to talk like a Republican.
Yeah, he does, and you can see too in Trump got him to do it in the debates. that everyone took as a joke and is not serious. And obviously, they both sort of made a mockery of it, in my opinion. But Trump got him to say exactly what he wanted him to say, and that is, he said, "I will not ban fracking. I do not support the Green New Deal." And if you're Trump, Trump took that. Trump's side touted him as a socialist, which is completely incorrect. If
Yeah.
anything, they should have been like, "Hey, Democrats." If I were Trump, I would have said, "Hey, Democrats, this man is a Republican. He's a right-wing nut job, and I'm going to make him say these things." And he did make him say it, but he didn't capitalize on it the way I thought he should have. But
there were so many missed opportunities. I mean, and again, not that Zach or I, to our listeners, not that Zach or I are fans of Trump, but it's interesting to see somebody who had ran in 2016 as a populist candidate with all this drain the swamp bullshit. Not, I mean, if he had actually done it, I would have thought it was cool, but since it was mostly a smokescreen, I'll call it bullshit. And in this last election, he wasn't the populist candidate that ran in 2016. He was different, and he really should have said, because what he ran on in 2016, he was actually out-lefting the Democrats while he was running as a Republican, which is an interesting phenomenon when you have a Republican who's basically talking more like a liberal and a Democrat who's basically talking more like a Republican. And instead of, I think that would have been really powerful. And I think Bernie missed a similar opportunity where they both could have pointed at Joe's hypocrisy, his pathological lying, and his repeated crony capitalist bullshit, and his warmongering and his drug war political profiteering. And they really didn't capitalize on that long history of corruption nearly as much as they could have.
Yeah, I mean, we're diverting from Michele quite a bit here, but that just really hits home that Trump became kind of an agent of the establishment throughout his 4 years. I mean, he told Jeb Bush to his face, "Your brother started an unjust war." He literally told him to his face.
Punk as fuck. Yeah.
Yeah. He told him to his face in front of the entire at the Republican debate. He literally said that to his face, that your brother basically started an inhumane, unjust war.
It's interesting though, because that's all theatrics. Because you see in it was like 2011 or 2012 in an interview, Trump literally. I'm assuming that this was preceding the Republican primaries leading up to the 2012 election, because he ran in 2012 as well. He said, when he was asked about Libya, he said, if there's no oil, I don't care. I only care if we're going to get oil. So like I think that's punk as fuck that he said that to Jeb Bush, but like it's all it. I think we should view it mostly as theatrics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but my point was that if he's capable of saying that kind of stuff to established Republican family, like, the Bush family is an established Republican.
Yeah, they're a dynasty.
Family, I mean, dynasty, yeah. And if he's gonna say that to them, then he definitely could have said the same thing to Biden. But he didn't do it because of I don't know. Kind of a wild card. So my guess is that he didn't want to sort of incriminate himself.
He just seemed more frazzled this time. I don't know what it was. He seemed like the big swinging dick in 2016, and like he was more than happy to slap anyone in the face with it. And this time it felt I don't know. It's weird. Fuck. We could go on and on about this. Let's get back to the cap fix here. When I was leaving, Cassandra was like, "You're gonna be an hour?" And I was like, "Yeah." So she with Blinken. We talked about this earlier. Flournoy founded the Center for a New American Security, CNAS, which is a actively pro-war think tank, which is funded by the U.S. government, arms manufacturers, oil giants, Silicon Valley tech giants, billionaire-funded foundations, and big banks. And again, this group, the CNAS, literally advocated for using, quote, wheat as a weapon, basically trying to induce an entire population into famine for the purposes of the war that they're fighting.
Yeah, and remember that was with Blinken. So
yeah,
those two were both in on it.
they also funded they also started an equity trust together. It's I forget what it's called, and I didn't research it very much because I wasn't as interested in it. But yeah, they've been buddies for a while.
Yeah.
Flournoy was also I wanted to find out a little bit more about, people use this word architect a little frivolously. Yeah. But what I had read was that she was the architect of the Obama administration's huge troop surge in Afghanistan. For context, I don't remember the numbers exactly, but we more than doubled our troop presence in Afghanistan. I want to say troops in Afghanistan were hovering somewhere around 20,000 before Obama took office. And after the troop surge, he increased it up to 100,000, and that was basically Flournoy's idea. She was the architect of it.
Yeah, and keep in mind that Obama ran on promises of bringing troops home. So I just want to remind everyone who's watching this that he swore up and down he would bring the troops home. And not only did he not bring them home, but he increased drastically our presence in the Middle East. So
I found a good graph. I'm going to share my screen for a sec.
Oh yeah, please do.
All right. Oh, start sharing. I have to hit that button. Okay. Oh, I have to minimize that. Is it sharing your face too, or just the graph? Whatever. Okay.
Graph.
Cool. So yeah, so if you look at U.S. troops in Afghanistan in thousands, so Barack Obama was elected in 2008. He would have taken office, January 20th or 21st or something like that in 2009. So right 2008, 2009, we're pretty much looking around 30,000. After the troop surge in Afghanistan, we were basically at 100,000 troops. Wow. So yeah, we more than tripled our troop presence in Afghanistan, and that was Flournoy's doing. That was her idea. And what's terrible too is that she and the administration immediately started lying to the American public and to Congress about the efficacy of the troop surge, even though there was a lot of evidence that the troop surge was actually leading to more soldiers being killed. Who could have thought that? Like
I thought bringing them home would increase the amount of troops that got killed.
Well, so even though the troop surge caused all sorts of problems, the people we were fighting, it's funny, I'm tempted to say things like insurgents or the terrorists, but like we're fighting people who are just trying to kick out an imperial power from their home country. Mm-hmm. Regardless of whether they're good people, like I hate that, like my first instinct is to even call them insurgents. But even though they actually started attacking more aggressively and more American troops were dying, it was a colossal shitstorm. She actually lied to Congress. Flournoy, we're talking about. She lied to Congress saying, "We are beginning to regain the initiative, and the insurgency is beginning to lose momentum." And still to this day, she opposes a full withdrawal of our troops from Afghanistan.
Wow.
This woman's going to be the most powerful. She's going to have more. She's going to be second in command in the military, second only to the president.
Yeah, please discourage your children from joining the military. I mean,
yeah,
it's
This is not a good time to do it.
Not. This is not good. You don't want your loved ones to go into this situation. This is kind of scary. So, and we were supposed to cover a little bit of the Iran war. My dog.
No, that's going to be another episode. We'll probably be in the war officially by our next episode. So
it could be. It's rapidly approaching.
There'll be more to talk about.
Yeah. So I haven't researched hardly anything on the war to try to keep my anxiety down. So
I respect the fact that it's not out of laziness. It's because it's too big and scary of a topic where you're just like, let's talk about Captain Pigs, which I get.
In real quick, it's also been extremely undercovered. What am I trying to say? It's not covered by any major media outlet.
Really? I was surprised by how much it is being covered.
Oh, is it? Maybe I'm just actually not paying attention at all. So,
that was one of the things that was most concerning to me is that, we've been between the U.S. and Israel. They've been whacking Israeli scientists for, a decade or so, and maybe my head was in the sand, but this is the first time I've fucking heard of it. Mm-hmm. So to me, if you're doing some nefarious, awful, evil shit that can be swept under the rug, like assassinating a scientist, then if I was somebody in the Pentagon or the CIA, I would sweep it under the rug. To me, it's concerning that they're actually pushing this as a major talking point, and the U.S. military repositioned the USS Nimitz back to the Persian Gulf. They officially claim that, well, we're just there the Nimitz is there to protect troops who are coming home from the drawdown. They're not coming home. Like, the Secretary of Defense literally called it a repositioning. They're not being repositioned to the United States. He would say it then. He would say, we're bringing the troops home. He said it's a repositioning. And he said also that their strategy in the Middle East is not fundamentally changing. Something's going to happen. But anyway, Flournoy, do you want to grab the next bullet point?
Oh, last bullet point here.
The war in Libya.
Yeah, so Flournoy supported the war in Libya, saying, I supported the intervention.
And after the fact, she said this, after it was clear that Libya was a colossal fucking waste of time that reduced the quality of life for everyone in that country. This is what she said to defend it.
Yeah. So, quote, I supported the intervention in Libya on humanitarian grounds. I think we were right to do it, end quote.
And this was after. So the reason that she gets away with saying shit like that, even though Libya is now a failed state with an active open slave trade, by all accounts, Libya was a disaster that we never should have gotten involved in. Not only shouldn't have gotten involved in, but we and Europe, particularly France, shouldn't have started that war. It wasn't a spontaneously occurring civil war. It was a coup d'etat, like so many others before it. The reason that the U.S. got away with intervening in Libya was it started this propaganda campaign saying that Gaddafi was getting his soldiers hyped up on Viagra and having them run around and rape the women of the rebellion. And so that was considered this abhorrent civil rights violation, and we had to get involved to stop that. But really, there was no evidence of any of it, and all of the pre-war propaganda was debunked by the United Nations, by Human Rights Watch, and by Amnesty International. And despite that, all these quote-unquote humanitarian grounds that Flournoy is talking about, despite that, there were no humanitarian grounds for intervening, at least not on behalf of the rebels. Despite that, she's still saying that, she thinks the U.S. was right to do it. Which you see that with a lot of these neoliberals too, where even when they're caught lying, they don't say we were wrong, we shouldn't have done it. Even when their policies result in disastrous consequences that cost real human lives, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, they still say shit like, I think we were right to do it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, is that, you know, I don't know if that's like the individual aspect of them, like not wanting to admit they're wrong, or the governmental part not wanting to admit the establishment was wrong. I think a little bit of both. Um, but that is interesting. You kind of see that increasingly in normal everyday society. People don't want to admit they're wrong. And then you see people who have actual power to do things like start a war in Libya, and they're not going to admit they're wrong. It, you know, um,
it's interesting. There one counterexample to that I saw while I was researching this was that Blinken at one point did say that the U.S. fucked up, and I'm trying to find the exact context. Hang on. I don't remember which article I saw it in. But basically, Blinken, I think it was so. If for all of our 5 listeners, I'm kind of going out on a limb here because I didn't take notes on this, but I'm pretty sure Blinken said that the U.S. made a big mistake with Syria, but he wasn't saying that the U.S. made a mistake in getting involved in Syria. What he was saying was that the U.S. made a big mistake by pulling out of Iraq. Yeah, no, that's exactly what it was, because what he was claiming was that Obama put Biden in charge of the Iraq withdrawal, and Blinken was saying we made a huge mistake. And he was talking about Syria, but really what he was saying, if you pay attention to it, he was saying the mistake was that we pulled out of Iraq, because he was saying that Syria was suffering because of the destabilized condition that we left Iraq in. Never mind the fact that ISIS was armed and trained in large part by the U.S. and Turkey within the Turkish border right along the border of Syria, in camps that we were lied to, camps that were supposedly refugee camps. And Serena Shim had video footage of all of this right before she coincidentally ran her car right into a cement truck. Sorry, that was a bit of a tangent, but the terrorist groups from Iraq that supposedly just spontaneously emerged because we pulled out too soon, destabilizing the region. Those were the people who were fighting against Assad. Those were the people that were allied with the U.S. in our war against Assad. And to the extent that Blinken says that we made any mistake, he said, oh, well, our mistake was that we pulled out of Iraq too soon, which allowed ISIS to form in Iraq. And then ISIS went in and started causing problems in Syria. And so you see this where, to the extent that they do apologize or admit they make mistakes, their apologies are actually that they weren't they didn't warmonger hard enough.
We didn't kill enough people.
Yeah, exactly.
That was our mistake. Yeah. Yeah.
It hurts my soul.
When they admit they're wrong, they admit they're wrong about the wrong thing. Like,
yeah.
Yep.